What was Joe Lozon's like first big win? He was like a massive underdog and surprised everybody.
Jens Pulver.
Yeah, Jens Pulver. Like, yeah, Joe Lozon's supposed to be the guy who comes out and shocks you by doing really well in the first round. Him standing there frozen with like glazed over eyes in front of Clay Guida knocking his ass out is not a good look.
Yeah, not good. I wonder what that's doing to his gaming. Like, if his reflexes are that bad when guys are trying to hit him, what's that do when he's on the old Xbox?
They do say that's
just extra sad. Like,
the man can't even game competitively.
Not only is your MMA career shot, but it's like being a shot fighter means that almost everything else you could do physically is shot too.
True.
Also correct. Yeah. Yikes.
Not only
this got real depressing.
He's been ousted from the top 15 in the UFC, but also the PS4 PSN top 1000. So all of that is just very depressing.
That's the literal definition of adding insult to injury. So pick which side of that is the insult and which side is the injury.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
All right, let me use the restroom real quick, and then you just want to hop in?
Sure.
Whatever. I mean, to your restroom? Not really.
That sounds so excited, Zane. Pat always does this, though. He's like, oh, well, yeah, I'm ready to go. Oh, now I have to go to the fucking bathroom.
It's because he drinks like 8 quarts of water every half hour.
Yeah.
So it's soda, isn't it? It's soda.
I think he and I both like our diet soda.
Yeah, he's always got like the massive like extra large.
It does always sound like
it's the KFC bucket to the 7-Eleven and being like, it's $2 no matter what.
Take a milk jug. It's not even cleaned out all the way. Yeah, it does always sound like a plastic, like Big Gulp style cup.
Yeah.
Oh man. The milk one was a little too far, I think. I'm still imagining that cloudy Diet Coke, and it's not making me happy.
God, that's disgusting.
Let's see. What else while Pat's up? Anything? Oh, Pat's returned. Oh.
All right. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
That's okay. We totally did not spend the whole time making fun of your drinking habits.
Drinking what now?
Nothing.
Fuck off, you.
Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. It's your boy, Connor Ruebusch, your host as always. With me is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. You may know him from the Bloody Elbow Vivisection. You may know him from Fights to Make, used to do Hindsight, all kinds of other shit over there on BloodyElbow.com, and you may know him from Twitter as well. This is Zane Simon, at the Zane Simon. Hello, the Zane Simon. Welcome to Heavy Hands.
I think you'll find that's Dr. Zane Simon, actually.
Is it?
Wait.
Is it?
Ooh. Pat gets prickly when other people pretend to be doctors, so you're going to have to watch yourself.
I've got my online accreditation in hypnotherapy.
Zane is a doctor in hypnotherapy from Trump University.
And crystal healing.
That sound you hear is me taking deep breaths.
Concentrating on not hyperventilating. Well,
I've got a paper bag right here too.
Pat's now remembering why we haven't talked since the last time we did Prospectus.
That's correct. Yes, I am remembering that. It's all coming rushing back, years and years and years of all of this.
Of the abuse, the endless abuse. Well, this is Heavy Hands. As I said, we have Zane with us sort of in a guest analyst role today, and we are going to be getting an additional take on the fights that just happened, the fights that are about to happen. You guys know the drill. Last week, it was Jacare Souza versus Derek Brunson 2, the main event of UFC on Fox 27. The main card of that was actually pretty solid, pretty enjoyable to watch. Unfortunately, nobody watched it, and so we are going to wait till the end of today's show to get to that, because the upcoming card has started to look better and better to me with each passing day. Listeners may remember that I think at the end of last week's episode, I just groaned in pain at the thought of Eric Anders destroying Lyoto Machida. That still makes me sad, but I'm a little more sold on that as a meaningful fight and the rest of this card as a solid lineup. So what we're going to do is kick things off with a breakdown of next week's main event. Again, that is the main event of what I guess we'll call UFC Belem, a.k.a. UFC Machida versus Anders. Pat, I'm going to get your take first. You are excited about Eric Anders, I believe.
I'm excited about both sides of this fight, actually. It strikes me as yet another example of the really fine matchup-based matchmaking that we've seen from Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard over the last few months, or over the last year or more, I suppose. The thing that I like about this is that what we've seen from Anders in his first two fights in the UFC, is a really good athlete, a guy who's really well put together, who makes good decisions, who seizes opportunities when they come to him, but who does basically all of his work moving forward. He is a pressure fighter, and he needs the fence. The fence is what allows him to do the things that he does. Machida is really, really good at staying off the fence. He is still a devastating counterpuncher, and if Anders is not on point, if he can't take a shot, if he does not have more tools for pressuring than what he's shown in his first couple of UFC fights, then Machida is probably going to knock him out, or at least run circles around him in fairly entertaining fashion. Interesting
take. Zane, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think I have one big question hanging over that, and it's an unfortunate one, which is when it comes to Machida being a devastating counterpuncher still, is he? Because what I kind of feel like we saw in the Derek Brunson fight and even the Yoel Romero fight is a Machida who was landing the shots he used to land, and people were just walking through them.
Yeah, I think that's fair to an extent. I think as I don't know, maybe the most hardcore Lyoto Machida fan of the three of us, it has been a little striking to me to look at just sort of the athletic decline of Lyoto Machida, that the speed, the reaction time, and even the power does seem to be going a little bit with just these like last 2 or 3 fights. He had that little renaissance at middleweight. He's clearly still had the power to put CB Dollaway away. But in the last 2 or 3, he has looked a little sort of gun shy, a little, I don't know, just a little shaky.
With the Brunson fight, he stepped in, he landed his counters, it wasn't like Brunson came out and did anything better against Machida than he did against Jacare. It's just that
we now know Derek Brunson can't change. He cannot change.
It's just that when Machida stepped in with his counter shots, they didn't really have any effect on Brunson.
But he only landed, per fight metric, he only landed 3 strikes in that fight. It's
enough.
not, you can't expect somebody to knock a guy out. And I think one of those was a body kick, wasn't it? So I think that you can't expect the guy to knock somebody out on 1 or 2 shots. Like he's going to need, if he lands 10 and nothing happens, then I think we're probably looking at a fair trend. Or in the case of when he fought Yoel Romero, he landed plenty of shots, but we know now that Romero was just an ungodly tough guy. Like he takes an amazing shot. Luke Rockhold, prior to the Michael Bisping knockout, looked like a guy who took a pretty good shot too when Machida landed on him. And Machida landed on him hard enough to buzz him a little bit. So I don't know that
those last 2 were also 2 years ago.
Almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, almost 3 years ago.
I'm not disputing any of that. But the difference is Anders is nowhere near as developed as those guys are, right? Like even compared to Brunson, Anders is not nearly that developed in terms of the variety of tools that he has at his disposal. He hasn't been fighting nearly as long. He does not have as deep a toolbox. Anders, you know who Anders reminds me of? This as a couple of guys who will dig down into undercards, I think you'll appreciate this comparison. He reminds me of a much better version of Scott Holtzman.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, certainly a more athletic,
supercharged Scott Holtzman.
Exactly.
Like just being more athletic is going to be a better version of Scott Holtzman, who's a good athlete as is.
Exactly. But think about that. He's fairly limited on the feet, but knows what he's trying to do. Has a really strong sense of what to do in a given situation and what is going to give him the best chance of winning. He's well-rounded. He does everything pretty well, and he really thrives in kind of the spaces between phases. Like he's an MMA native. And especially, and that means I think that he's especially devastating in the clinch.
Yeah, he's looked really good in those, not even just like MMA specific transitional spaces, but even the way he'll wait for the opening for the left hand to reappear. He might flash the jab. He did this a lot against Marcus Perez. He would get him bending over or leaning away with the jab. Perez would know the left hand was coming, and so he wouldn't just pop right back up, and Anders would just sort of keep the pressure on him, stay in the pocket, and wait for that head to reappear from behind that shoulder or wherever it had gone and pick him off. So, like, there is definitely a strong instinct for those between range, between phase spaces from Anders.
It's the kind of thing where if you're a linebacker on a national championship college football team under an all-time great defensive coach, what that prioritizes is decision-making in the moment, right? Like, you can see this is very clearly a thing that he brought from his football career, is like the ability to make a read, understand what the broader context is, and then to immediately make a decision based on that. Like, it seems to be a fairly straightforward thing that he's carried over here, and it serves him well in those kinds of fights. The question is, can he force Machida into that kind of fight?
Well, it's also sort of a question of, is this Gray Maynard versus Fernando Bruno or Yuri Alcantara versus Alexander Perez? Like, how much of the worst guy I've ever lost to, or I would ever maybe lose to, is this for Lyoto Machida, you know?
Yeah, it is definitely one of those, this would be his worst loss yet sort of fights. Although I don't know, it's possible that it does seem possible to me that Eric Anders is kind of on a level with Derek Brunson, because like Brunson has
to prove it.
Derek Brunson has the more experience and everything, but Eric Anders is, I think, still a better decision maker. Has proven that already in just like 2 fights. So
sure, but I think he would have to prove over the long haul that he's actually a better fighter. Being a better decision maker in the short term it's good. It's what gives him a chance to win this, along with just being really athletic. But
this is like, so there's no question, if we're laying out the basic dynamics of the fight, Anders is going to pressure, probably. He's going to try to push Machida back to the fence. And at some point in there, he's going to try to land a big left hand or land something as they're entering, exiting, or messing around in the clinch. So how many opportunities is he going to get to do that? And how many does he actually need to finish a Machida who is obviously athletically diminished and who can't take a punch the way that he used to?
Yeah. And does he get a little starstruck and try to not pressure and try to stay away from counters, and then you end up with like the ugliest 3-round fight possible?
That would be suicidal. Yeah.
5-round fight. It's a 5-rounder.
Yeah. 5-round fight.
Don't tempt me, Zane, with what might be the terrible future depressed us fights that we might actually get to experience. I do think I think there are glimmers of exceptionalism from Anders in terms of overcoming the amount of inexperience he has. When did this guy start training? Like 2016?
Yeah, he won his first fight in 2015.
2015.
And my guess is probably that he spent some time in the gym before that, but
yeah. So
he had some amateur fights before that, and he had trained jiu-jitsu before that.
Yeah, he had amateur bouts going back to 2012. So he had a good long run up to being the fighter he is now, but he's still progressing quickly.
There were still little things. Yeah. The inexperience. I'm just trying to weigh Anders' inexperience against Machida's fragility, because there were little moments even in that Marcus Perez fight, and Perez was like, he was game. He looked like a solid fighter. It was kind of his first big step up against Anders.
Stupidly tough and incredibly limited.
Insanely tough. There were moments where Anders would be on the ground and Perez would just be, I'm screaming at the TV like he's looking for an anaconda. He's looking for an anaconda. And Anders just sits up into it and just accepts it and then powers out by going for the position. Like, he really believes that in a lot of ways that aggression is going to get him out of bad spots, that he's able to drive through and just focus on what he wants to do. But there were also little glimmers of him taking his foot off the gas in the second rounds to conserve his energy and trying to manage himself. And so I don't know. I'm kind of caught between. I'm not exactly sure where Eric Anders is right now as a developing fighter.
I'm less concerned about that though than where Machida is. I think we know how Anders is likely to win this fight. If he does, he's going to plant a left hand on the side of Machida's head as Machida tries to duck out after rushing in, or he's going to kind of bust him into the clinch and just like horsepower him into a couple of knees or an elbow and finish him. The question is, Anders is going to give Machida openings of the kind that he used to exploit with regularity, right? Yep. Can Machida do that? Can he get in and out? Can he land those counters? Can he eat a shot or two when he needs to? Because we know he has the skills to do it. The question is, does he have the physical capability to do that at this point?
Yeah, it would be rough because it's only a few years since that Gegard Musashi win that was so good, and like I would never pick Eric Anders over Gegard Musashi right now. You know.
Well, somebody's got to say it. Don't make me be the first one to pick Anders over Machida.
I at least off the top of my head, I haven't watched enough. I haven't watched my refresher tape to really pinpoint what I'm seeing in the moment. But off the cuff, I'm picking Anders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to know the really depressing potential outcome here? This is kind of the corollary to Machida's physical decline. Is that his output has dropped again. Remember, his output was really low for a while, and then he kind of upped it for a few impressive fights. Like when he fought Chris Weidman, his output was higher than it had been. He landed a lot of really good shots when he wasn't getting controlled on the ground at a pretty good pace. When he fought Dalloway, he was going out there and looking to put it on him.
Munoz.
He went through a phase where he had done better with that, and now, watching the first 2.5 minutes of that fight with Brunson, he barely threw. The really depressing outcome here is Anders doesn't finish him. He just kind of slowly marches him down and outlands him 2-1 or 3-2 and takes a 25-minute decision where you think, okay, all right, I guess this is where we're at now.
But given the MMA judging from the last couple cards, that might be a Machida win.
I don't know. It depends on how much noise he makes while he's missing with his punches.
Yeah, there we go.
Then he's definitely taken around.
If Machida can start ki-eyeing, then maybe he'll take a decision off low volume.
One can hope.
That does sound like a depressing scenario. I just have a feeling that Anders is of a type that Machida would have once had great success against, but even then, he does have the look of a more athletic specimen than a lot of the guys that Machida was easily outworking. And plus, this is why I'm caught on how much his inexperience is a problem, because there are some things about his game that I really like. I really like the small little steps he takes into range. I like how he manages his distance, and without being crazy aggressive, taking these big open swings that allow somebody like maybe Machida to time and evade and counter, he tends to kind of probe his way in to get into position before he'll let go the big bomb. And I just think that's one of those metagame sort of developments that I don't know that Machida ever fully caught up with, and I have less confidence that he will have caught up with it as an aged fighter. So I kind of feel like he's going to get cracked.
Yeah, that's my gut. That's what my gut says. But my gut also told me that Derek Brunson was going to knock out Jacare, and I had to play against that.
Yeah, although Pat Zane does have one credit over both of us. He was the only Bloody Elbow staff member to pick Stipe Miocic instead of Francis Ngannou.
That's true. That's true. I think I kind of have a little faith in Machida still. I think that the gaps in Anders' game are really, really big. And as much as I'm a believer, you know what? I think the second Machida gets hit with a big shot,
I just don't think he can take the shot. That's my fear, man.
I came into this ready to pick Machida, but I've kind of talked myself into thinking this in no way. It would not at all surprise me if Machida either knocked out Anders with something or kind of danced his way around him to a decision. Mm-hmm. That would in no way be surprising to me. But it's just if he's going to eat, I don't think he can take 25 flush shots on the chin from Anders. And even in the most absolutely favorable scenario for Lyoto Machida without a knockout over 25 minutes, if he eats one shot a minute, I don't think he can take one shot a minute from a guy who hits as well as Anders does.
No.
Yeah.
And Anders has that killer instinct too, man. When he gets somebody hurt, he goes for it. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on then. Now that we've all broken our hearts, we'll go to talk about bantamweights. This is the co-main event, at least as far as I can tell, of the Machida-Anders card. John Dodson taking on Pedro Munoz. Munoz has sort of worked his way into contention after a bit of a rough stretch. Now he's on 4 in a row with a win over Rob Font, who just got a really good win 2 weeks ago. He's taken on John Dodson, who, of course, was a 2-time flyweight title challenger and is now, I think, 2-2 or something like that. Has had a bit of an up-and-down career, but against top-flight opposition at bantamweight. Zane, what's your take on it?
I mean, my take is that for John Dodson, this would be a wildly disappointing loss for him to take. And it would be pretty surprising to me if he ended up on the wrong side of it, just based purely on the dynamics of the athletic game standing. Like, Dodson narrowly took a loss to John Lineker that a lot of people did not, a lot of people thought Dodson won that fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really, it's all about his ability. And like, that's a much better pressure, like pouring on power pressure fighter than Munoz is.
We've definitely seen Munoz embrace the pressure more than ever before in his last few fights. And we know he can take a shot. We know, he's offensively very good at chaining his shots together, but
like Dodson, he had Wineland in front of him not that long ago, and it was just like the easiest skate through it, no questions asked win at all.
Pat, do you know why Pedro Munoz is so fantastically hittable? Like, do you have a theory on what might cause that?
Because he spends all of his time in range. He's not an especially skilled defensive fighter aside from a double forearms guard, and he's not very fast.
Yeah,
so
that's the big thing. It's
a combination of all of those.
If he was a faster fighter, then I could see, Dodson, his fight with Moraes, which was also a split, but like that loss, like he looked a little bit more like the guy who's just kind of keying in on the same few wild strikes and circling away and playing this classic Dodson sort of formless, planless game.
Mm-hmm.
But without the speed to catch up to him that even somebody like Moraes has in his kicks and punches, Munoz is just going to be there to like have to try to catch him as Dodson exits, and I don't see it happening.
See, I think Dodson will catch it, or I think Munoz will catch him with shots. I just don't think they're going to be enough. Like,
well, there's he's not going to not land anything all fight. Fair.
Well, yeah, but no, I mean, I think there's a real scenario here where they walk away having landed roughly the same number of fights because Munoz, if we're comparing him to Marlon Moraes, throws a lot more than Moraes does volume-wise, right? Like, he strings together much longer combinations. He's much more willing to take a shot to give one back than Moraes is. He just throws more. He works faster. So while he's not as fast as Moraes or as skilled by a long stretch, he is just going to pump out substantially more volume. So if Dodson doesn't knock him out, which is probably the most likely scenario here because Munoz is so hittable, if Dodson doesn't knock him out, we could be looking at another fight where Dodson gets slightly outlanded or where the output is effectively even and you end up going to a 3-round judge's decision.
Yeah, I think Dodson would have to make like some fairly critical strategic errors for it to become that kind of fight. Like, it does feel like it's his fight to lose.
But you've always thought that Dodson is the fighter that makes critical strategic errors. So.
Right. I still don't feel like I have a great read on who John Dodson is as a fighter and how he can control him. I mean, we've definitely seen flashes of a more mature John Dodson. I think that John Lineker fight is one of the bigger ones of how well he dealt with the pressure of John Lineker and just continually found new ways of responding to it over 5 rounds. If he can do that, if Pedro Munoz puts a similar kind of pressure and pace on him that John Lineker did, but while not having John Lineker's chin, then I think John Dodson might even just end up stumbling into the right approach to beat him because he's been there before.
Yeah, well, let's think about this for a second. What would be the strategic error for Dodson in this fight?
I think that Dodson would consent to exchange too much with Munoz, plant his feet and trade with him more than he has to, rather than darting in and out, catching him with a counter, waiting for Munoz to lead, and then getting away again after he does. I think that would be.
It seems like the strategic problems he has more is about his dependence on darting in and out more than like a sense that he just wants to plant and trade. It's more like when he has the potential to actually sit down and crack somebody harder and stay on them, he just gets out and gets away. So that would be that feels like it would be more of a departure to me, you know.
That's Munoz's only place to win. Is like standing toe to toe trading with each other. That's where he's going to.
I think that's wrong. I think that you're focused on the striking here. I think the actual strategic error would be for him to get drawn into a firefight, get taken down, wind up in a scramble, and get submitted.
Sure, that's the kind of exchanges are what lead to opportunities for Munoz to grab a snap down or shoot for a single and turn it into a scramble on the ground
with his back to the fence. So
sure. So here's my question then. Would it be actually a bigger mistake for Dodson to take Munoz down? Because I see that as more likely.
You think Dodson to take Munoz down?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He might.
Oh, God.
I think you would go in and, like...
That would be a bad idea.
Snatch a single leg and rip him to the ground, and I could easily see that happening. Because Munoz is so, like, flat-footed walking forward.
Yeah, man.
See, I think if you're Dodson on the feet at this point, you don't want to overthink it. Like, you hit harder than Munoz. You're much faster than he is. You have better footwork. Like, just let the fight come to you on the feet. Just don't get in a scenario where you wind up scrambling with him at all. And trust that, like, you know what? If you go to a 3-round decision, you might lose on volume, but you will have hit him so much harder than he's going to hit you that just trust that that's going to work itself out. The thing you don't want to do is do something is like overthink it with takedowns or get backed up to the fence and wind up chain wrestling or allowing Munoz to spin to your back or something like that. Like,
I don't think you ever have to focus on like being well-rounded against Pedro Munoz because he's going to keep giving you the same openings irrespective of how you capitalize on them early. Like the openings to his face on the feet are still going to be there. So you just keep hitting him. Just keep scoring away until the fight's over. I'm hoping that is the approach John Dodson takes, but that's why I was cautious about him like exchanging with Munoz. I think you're right, Pat. Like planting his feet in front of Munoz in open space would not be nearly as risky. If he allows Munoz to back him up into the fence and plants his feet and starts to trade with him, then that could really get pretty risky for John Dodson pretty quickly. That could turn into a scramble on the ground before he realizes what's happening.
I came into this ready to give Munoz a pretty good shot, but I really think Dodson is still just kind of too physically gifted and powerful for Munoz at this point. Like, I think Munoz could make it interesting, but
if you're looking at the people that Dodson has lost to and the ways he's lost to them, you're looking at, like John Lineker, who would be like the closest comparison and hits a lot harder and moves a lot faster. And then Moraes kind of mostly just was able to hit harder and cleaner and time things better as Dodson was coming in and out.
He just played Dodson's game more technically than Dodson did, basically.
Yeah. He was able to pick him off as he came in and out, being a more technical striker. And neither, you remove the technique, you remove the speed and the power, and it's hard to see like Munoz just picking up the same where either one left off.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, all three of us going with John Dodson there, I think. Zane, were you going with John Dodson as well?
Oh yeah.
Just feels like a favorable style matchup for him. And not to mention, like Pedro Munoz's, we're talking about John Dodson's losses. Pedro Munoz's last 4 wins. Like, look at the fucking hell he had to go through to get those wins, especially against Stasiak, even against Font. All right, so let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to get into whatever else from UFC Belem looks interesting to us. And after that, we're moving back to last week's card. UFC on Fox 27, Jacare versus Brunson 2 had quite a few interesting outcomes, so we will cover that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's go ahead, guys, and talk about Valentina Shevchenko. She is fighting Priscila Cachoeira, a Brazilian that no one has any reason as of yet to have heard about, in her women's flyweight debut. Looks like a favorable style matchup for Valentina Shevchenko. Cachoeira comes in swanging and banging. To me, that says UFC is setting Valentina Shevchenko up for not just a win, but a win that actually looks kind of sexy and interesting, unlike some of her past fights in the UFC. What do you guys think?
This is one of those fights that exists to try to provide marketing material and highlights for a future run for a fighter. That's what this is here for, which the UFC, frankly, could probably stand to do more often.
It's not often they do that.
Yeah, it's a good idea. They should do stuff like this more often, just so we realize, frankly, how good fighters like Valentina Shevchenko actually are relative to the vast majority of their competition. Like, it's a handy thing to remind people sometimes, like, yeah, no, this fighter is just really, really, really good. They've been in some tough fights where they haven't gotten to showcase everything that they do well, and here's an opportunity to do that against somebody who is tailor-made for Shevchenko to just blast her. Like, Cachoeira is a pretty standard come forward Brazilian Muay Thai stylist. She throws combinations. She doesn't mind banging it out in the pocket. She throws hard kicks, likes to pressure. In other words, that is exactly the kind of fighter that Shevchenko is just made to light up with counter right hands and spinning back kicks. And like, she is there to be kind of tossed around and beaten up. And that's, like, it's good to give Shevchenko some opportunities to do that.
Yeah. And it's, for a while I was kind of thinking like, maybe the UFC should like give Nico Montano, the flyweight champion, that Eubanks fight first. Like, let her build a little bit off of that tough season before Shevchenko. But all the time all the flyweight fights since then have just been so terrible.
Yeah.
That I'm kind of just like, no, just throw Shevchenko. Just please, just push Shevchenko to the top of that division. Make her the Joanna-esque figure at the top of flyweight, and make all these other people, give them all a goal to strive for that's like more interesting than just who's going to be the next person that fights Nico Montano and probably beats her. It's
the flyweight fights since that title one have been the very worst of generic MMA in 2017 and 2018, where like some striking that's not low volume, but it's not especially high volume either. Like semi-competent takedowns, grappling that varies somewhere between like borderline incompetent and I guess this person knows what they're doing. Like it's the worst of kind of generic, doesn't stand out in any way, shape, or form fighting that like, it's not a bad way to spend 15 minutes of your time watching it, but it's also not going to make anybody think this is a thing I have to watch. So you need to give people something to hang on to if you're going to make this division viable. And frankly, Valentina Shevchenko, you could do a lot worse than her.
Yeah. I mean, when Jiyeon Kim versus Justine Kish is like the highlight flyweight fight to date.
Yeah.
Fuck. Tell me you guys aren't excited for the eventual matchup between Valentina Shevchenko and Caitlin Chukagian. Doesn't that sound like a style matchup you just have to see?
I mean,
we saw that fight already. God, it was terrible.
It was Shevchenko versus Holly Holm.
Yeah.
All right.
We saw that.
So we're not especially sold on women's flyweight as a division. I mean, really, it will
get a lot better. It'll be a lot better than women's bantamweight, no question.
Sure.
But starting it out with a whole swath of really rough and fairly under-tutored tough competitors. Like, it just did not. It has not given the division anything interesting to really sink your teeth into. And the women who've moved up and down to it so far, many of them, Paige Van Zandt, Jessica Ai, have not really performed in a way that makes you like, oh yeah, this is what I'm waiting for.
The comparison with when they started strawweight is instructive, right? Like that season of strawweight had fighters who were objectively accomplished and objectively talented. Like Tisha Torres was only like 4-0 when she got on there, but you knew from having watched Tisha Torres, like, oh, she's athletic, she's pretty well put together, she trains at a good camp. You had even somebody like Randa Marcos had fights against established and interesting fighters in that division. You could see there were things that she did well. Like when you looked at that flyweight roster, there were fighters on there where I'm like, I have no idea why this person is even being considered for inclusion here.
It felt much more like a standard tough season, i.e., in the way that they clearly needed to fill out the roster. Whereas like the strawweight roster, there were notable exceptions. There were people like, wow, I'm surprised they didn't get on tough. This person's phenomenal. That was not the case for this flyweight season.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons for that we could go into if we wanted to, but which we probably don't need to.
No.
And the end result here is just like, give Shevchenko her showcase, let her do some interesting things, and then make her your face, and let the division grow around her. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, well, then we're going to see a lot of super fights.
Yeah, but even if it doesn't, honestly, I'm not looking forward to Shevchenko Montano. I don't think anybody is. Not because Nico, just from an interest perspective, it doesn't have a lot of heat. I think really
all I'm looking forward to is Shevchenko Jędrzejczyk.
Yes,
and the closer I get to that, sooner the better.
I think that's what they're hoping for. It's definitely what I'm hoping for in the near future, that Jędrzejczyk moves up permanently to flyweight after all this talk of horrible, brutal weight cuts, and takes on Shevchenko, who beat her many times before in the past. So there is some interesting narrative to be had at 125, but it does seem like a really long, winding, and not particularly interesting road to get there. But matchups like this, I think, will help sort of paste over that interim until we can start caring about flyweight. At least give us some things that we can be excited about. Give us some matchups that show off who the best fighters in the division are. And yeah, I think this looks on the nose like we are giving a sort of reckless come forward striker to one of the best counterpunchers in all of women's MMA. And that sounds like a recipe for Shevchenko to look pretty damn good. All right, and I think goes without saying, all of us picking Shevchenko in that matchup. Let's go ahead and move on then. Zane, I'm going to skip over Thiago Santos versus Anthony Smith, at least for the moment. I will let you say a few words on that matchup. But I do want to talk about the featured prelim of this card, Sergio Moraes, also a fight that Zane should be very excited to talk about, versus Tim Means. Zane, Sergio Moraes is like your guy. He's like your number one. Nobody else really knows about this Brazilian fighter.
I feel like at some point I need to never say that I like some random guy's game, because from then on, like, I have never stopped hearing about that one Russian heavyweight, fucking
Erokin.
Konstantin Erokin.
Like, to this day, every time he fights, somebody hits me up on Twitter, and I'm just like, I can never say I like a fighter that like nobody else cares about anymore, can I?
It's like Extreme Home Makeover. You tell me you like Sergio Moraes once, and then you come home and your whole bedroom is Sergio Moraes. He's just there's a cardboard cutout pasted to the wall. The bed is shaped like Sergio Moraes.
You've like redetailed my car only with like
with wild winging overhand rights. Yeah.
I am excited for this fight. I do like Sergio Moraes. I like his janky, weird jiu-jitsu and wild man striking that's like accurate and timed, but still totally sloppy and in no way structured.
Evolus Sao Tai, baby.
And I like this fight against Tim Means, who is starting to maybe look like he's taking some of the wear of a long career, and is still the much more technical fighter than Sergio Moraes everywhere that's not grappling. So, it's one of those fights where I'm probably gonna pick Tim Means because Sergio Moraes only seems to grapple when like absolutely forced to. It's like put a gun to his head and maybe he'll use his jiu-jitsu game. But if it's just a kickboxing match with Tim Means, Means is still tough and is just a better volume striker. So that would probably have me picking him here. But it's going to be a reasonably entertaining fight just because of the way that Moraes has to approach Means and the way that Means has more opportunities to answer him.
Yeah, why do you feel like Tim Means is like what makes you think that he's feeling the effects of that career?
I think it's something about the Belal Muhammad fight. Mm-hmm. It just kind of looked like he wasn't pulling the trigger as well as he used to. Yeah. And I mean, this is a dude who's been fighting for 14 years. At some point, like...
Oh, the wheels have to fall off eventually. I didn't think he looked too bad against Muhammad, though. I just kind of thought it was like it was just kind of like a mirror match in a lot of ways, where he just was like, and I think Tim Means has always had that problem. He's looked more, more dominant in some recent matchups because they gave him guys like Sabah Homasi and John Howard, where he gets these really impressive knockouts. But there's been plenty of fights in Tim Means' career, like the Neil Magny fight, where he just kind of takes his foot off the gas. And even then, I mean, per fight metric anyway, he did throw 234 strikes against Belal Muhammad, who threw 221 back at him.
Maybe I just didn't. Maybe it's just that, like, I'm still not sold on Muhammad, and him winning that fight is a little, like, But it could just be just one of those just right matchups that Means just underperforms in traditionally.
I have a theory about this, which is that Means is essentially a snowball fighter, where he gathers momentum, and when he looks really good is when he figures something out that his opponent can't respond to, or whether it's a particular kind of strike or a particular range or a particular thing he does in the clinch or particular pace. A particular rhythm of the fight. When he figures that out and his opponent can't respond to it, then Means looks like a world beater. Like he's lacing you with these left hands and he's slashing you up in the clinch with elbows and knees, and he's hitting these slick takedowns and doing these kinds of things, and he just kind of overwhelms you with some aspect. Muhammad just never let himself get overwhelmed in that fight. So Means would do things and Muhammad would do them back, and that's kind of the common takeaway is like Alex Oliveira went out there in their rematch and just overwhelmed Means, like, whereas in the first fight, I think Oliveira was really surprised by Means's aggression and like the fact that he just didn't stop when he found something that he was doing that had success. So that makes this fight with Moraes really fun because Moraes is a guy who's going to try to do things back to you too. Like,
but he's not going to do them nearly as technically. So
but that's what makes it what makes it a great matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think your read on that is right, Pat. Like, Means definitely has this. There's this feeling watching him strike where he just has to kind of force one little wedge in to your game, and once it's there, every time I feint the jab, he pulls back. Okay, I feint the jab, I'm going to hit him with the left hand. All right, I'm going to do it again. Oh, he reacted the same way and got hit by the same shot again. Like, once he reveals an error like that in your game where you just cannot stay a step ahead of him, you cannot make adjustments to his one little opening, you're right. Like, the feints start coming. Yeah. He gets into this nice fluid rhythm where he's just touch, pet, slap, as a coach I once knew used to say. Like, this... He Snowball is right, but he's a very tactical Snowball. The way he kind of just picks away and finds his openings, but he definitely gets into this fluid rhythm. Sergio Moraes is, of course, out of the Evolução Thai school. I think that's Andre Dida, right?
That is Andre Dida.
So he has like my favorite kind of Brazilian Muay Thai, which is none of the techniques look right, but they all serve a very distinct purpose, and the guy throwing them knows exactly how they work. So yeah, like, I think Sergio Moraes may actually have he's gonna make mistakes. He's not gonna make like all of the right defensive moves at the exact right ways, but I think he has enough craft in his game to change up the way he reacts to Means and to keep his movements a little unpredictable. So I don't know. Like, I can see Tim Means having a hard time of building that momentum in this matchup if Moraes is just giving him this weird tricky rhythm and consistently countering him and making Means pay for probing and trying to find that wedge.
As much as I like Sergio Moraes, it would make me a little sad to see him get out, or to see Tim Means get out kickboxed.
To outstrike Tim Means, yeah, it would be. What do you think that Moraes' wrestling is going to stack up against Means' takedown defense at all?
I don't think Moraes just doesn't try enough when it comes to his wrestling and grappling.
Yeah.
Even when he does go after it, his wrestling especially, it's always just sort of like half-hearted. It's like, oh, I guess I'll push this takedown, and if that didn't work, I'll just go back to striking because I like striking. And
he doesn't have drive, right? Like, that's when he shoots a takedown, he just does not drive through at all. Like, it's clear that he has never really spent a lot of time working with like actual like D1 type of wrestlers in his career, because even if his timing is good, and he does occasionally show off like, oh, like that was the right time to shoot that takedown when your opponent's hips were here, they were at this position in the cage, like their hands were up, like you could get in on the hips. He just does not know how to maintain kind of proper posture as he drives through to finish. So you get a lot of kind of like the takedown equivalent of arm punches from him. Yeah,
and that works well enough against like a guy like Zach Otto, but Means is generally a lot more put together. His takedown defense, he can get overwhelmed, but you have to actually go out and overwhelm him. You kind of have to follow the Oliveira route where you're just like suddenly smothering him.
And Moraes had like a bunch of injuries around like 2013 or so, right?
Yeah,
he had like several long layoffs.
I think knee and maybe shoulder injuries, although I think I'm saying shoulder just because of the way he throws his punches. I can't imagine him not having shoulder
injuries. Must have thrown out a shoulder at some point. Yeah, I think he used to be a little more, granted against sometimes, well, he's kind of been against sort of middling opposition throughout his UFC career. So I think he used to be a little more effective with his takedowns, and then maybe he's lost some of that drive, but he definitely has always been like a power through to get the finish kind of guy. So yeah, I mean, I still like Tim Means here. I like the volume. I think that's a big advantage for him, but I do think that Moraes can potentially find weird ways of halting that volume as long as he can stay on the counter and not fall into any predictable patterns. But not the most predictable style of movement in the world anyway. So, and then last up here, we'll have to do this one relatively quickly, but we did want to talk about another bantamweight fight. Douglas Silva de Andrade, a.k.a. Douglas de Silva, is taking on Marlon Chito Vera. This is a fight that's kind of buried on the Fox Sports 1 prelims here, but has some decent implications around it, I think. Marlon Vera has looked really, really solid in his last several fights, even though he lost his last one to John Lineker, was one of the better resistances anyone has ever given John Lineker, and certainly we didn't expect that. Vera's just kind of been slowly growing in confidence. I remember I tapped him like last year as future young veteran, but I think he may actually exceed that sort of potential that I picked for him. I think he may actually be better than that. Pat, what do you make of this?
I think it's an interesting fight. De Andrade is always a guy I kind of had my eye on because he's so fast and so athletic. Like that was always really striking to me, just how kind of gifted he was in a raw physical sense. His game is nowhere near as advanced as his physicality was at that one point. He's exactly the kind of dude who should put on an entertaining fight with somebody like Marlon Vera, but eventually get overwhelmed by kind of the depth of Vera's technical skill on the feet and his willingness to try and do a whole bunch of different things. But I think it's going to be pretty high paced, pretty fun. I think you're going to see a lot of wild shit, a lot of spinning stuff, and like a lot of athleticism on display.
Silva's like my white Azuma Nelson of MMA, where he's got this weird, like super tense characteristic where he's just vibrating with energy at any moment. There's no rhythm. Nothing is relaxed and fluid. He's just waiting.
He's a wind-up toy with one gear missing. That's how he fights.
Basically, yeah. But it does kind of make him difficult to adjust to. I think he's going to tag Chito pretty often early in this bout because there's not really any tells. He's just kind of tense, and then he explodes, and it is kind of difficult to tell when his shots are coming. It also doesn't give him much rhythm to play with. So once you sort of key in on his patterns, then he starts to get picked apart. I think that's what's going to happen to him, but he's dangerous early and does have some craft. I mean, he's not just a brute. You know, he's got a well-developed kickboxing game. It's just a weird one. What do you think, Zane?
It's a kickboxing game you develop while lifting cinder blocks in your backyard. That's every bit of. He looks like every bit like a great athlete who just spent all of his time learning to fight with some other dudes who didn't know how to fight, and is good enough to like make that into a actual. Like, got enough experience over the years and eventually moved maybe to an actual camp that actually ironed that out a little.
Brazil's Kimbo Slice, according to Zane, is Douglas Silva de Andrade.
Well, I mean, he did definitely, his training camp for a long time regionally in Brazil was his backyard.
It was literally his backyard. That's not an exaggeration. Like, it was just him and a bunch of dudes who would just kind of fight each other in a backyard. Like,
Brazil's Kimbo Slice. Holy shit.
Yep.
I mean... but a bantamweight and not marketable. So
yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about it on that one. Unless you got something else to say, Zane.
No, I'm always a little worried about Vera. Like, he's definitely ironing some of the edges out of his lapses where he just kind of tends to let himself back against the cage and try to pick off that like one exciting thing to burst away from pressure with. But he's like his Lineker loss did look improved in that regard because Lineker was somebody who's absolutely going to make him pay for it all fight, and Lineker didn't get as much done as he would have expected. But I also do want to say, I mean, young veteran, like that's not really a label you can. I don't know if that's a label you can exceed. I mean, you know, if Jorge, what's his name?
Masvidal?
Masvidal, yeah. If Jorge Masvidal is a young veteran, like. Being a near title contender for years on end is not
true.
Like, you know, that's about as good as anybody can hope to do unless you're going to be a champion. And I don't know that I see Vera as ever being a champion.
Yeah, I do think there was, to your point about Vera, like, not just waiting for that big shot. I think he's learning to think a little less and to feel a little more in his fights. Like, I still remember, and this will always worry me about him as a fighter, but I still remember his fight with Davy Grant, where he got so frustrated being controlled on the ground, and it looked like now with a little bit more context, I feel like I can sort of surmise that he was like he had something in mind he wanted to do, and Davy Grant just kept denying it, and then he just got more and more fixated on making something particular happen on the ground and couldn't do it, and couldn't like take a step back to realize maybe I should work to scramble back to my feet. Maybe I should work to do this. Maybe I should change my tack and just make something happen. And like against John Lineker, it's sort of, I think, the realization of that development where he's just making things happen now. He's fighting a lot more on feel and not just, okay, I'm going to surprise him with this big shot. It's becoming less of that like Mike Winklejohn setups with no, you know what I'm talking about? Mike Winklejohn's fighters do this like switch up thing where there's no requirement that you wait on the switch up. So he's doing less of that, which I like. But I share your reservations about him probably still having quite a bit of that tendency to overthink and get frustrated in him. All right, well, let's move on. We'll take one more break. When we come back, we are going to recap and analyze the results of UFC on Fox 27, a.k.a. UFC Souza versus Brunson 2, after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are, as promised, looking back at Souza versus Brunson 2. And I know we're all very excited just hearing those two names put together. But to be honest, after a lot of very iffy judging, as Zane has pointed out a few times, and a really, really slow Fox Sports 1 prelim card up until the last 2 fights, the last 6 bouts or so of this card were all pretty fun, I thought. It actually ended up being pretty enjoyable to watch. Me and the 3 other people watching, I think, could agree on that.
You and 1.493 million of your closest friends. The lowest overnight ratings for a UFC on Fox event since the series began.
See, this is one of those things, like, but after the card ended and I had to do like a post-fight show and I did like a post-fight editorial thing and all that, and I just kept thinking, I was like, objectively, this card was fine, but it was so meaningless that the only thing that sticks in my mind is how shitty the judging was, and so objectively it sucked. That, it was just without any meaning to it, and with a lot of bad judging. Even the fact that the last 6 fights were all pretty good was just like,
I don't mean to keep harping on this, but there's a real fundamental problem at the core of the UFC's product that is going to determine a lot of its future success as an organization, which is that you just have card after card after card like this, where they're not bad. Like they're putting on a perfectly competent product of well-matched violence, but there's no broader meaning to it. Nobody really knows the names of the people. Like, you kind of have your audience of about 1.5 million people who are going to tune in because they see UFC on Fox, or it's, on Fox Sports 1, it's 900,000 to 1.1 million people who are going to tune in because it's Fox Sports 1 and they're looking for some fights to watch, or a pay-per-view where you're going to get a minimum of 150,000 people who are going to buy it because of whatever. But those are your audience floors. If you're content to just hit your audience floor every time, okay, I suppose you can keep going on like that, but that's not worth anything. And it's certainly not going to be...
slowly eroded the audience floor for years now.
Yes. And so but cards like this, while they seem okay in the short run, I think they're actually immensely damaging in the long run, because your takeaway is, okay. If your takeaway is, okay, that might even be worse than something that is actively bad because you have no feelings about it.
Yeah. And it is compounded by the fact that the UFC is busily cannibalizing the tops of their divisions, trying to make short-term profit with these super fights and everything. Luke Thomas was talking about this. He did a live chat thing during this card, and he was raising the point that Miocic versus Cormier, he was really trying to emphasize there are many, many ways in which that fight could result in could have a horrible long-term result for the UFC. And it's because we have these cards that mean nothing, and then the cards that mean anything are made in such a way that there's no opportunity for the people from the meaningless cards to make inroads into the meaningful ones. There's no way for if champions are just fighting each other, hype kind of comes from the top down a lot of times. People have to beat these people. They have to work their way into these meaningful fights. And if the meaningful fighters are all just fighting each other and never giving opportunities, then these cards just feel more and more meaningless with time.
Yeah, and I said it going in, and I overshot it a little because Jacare, having beat Brunson so decisively, and there being an interim title floating out there that he could potentially have a chance at, means that maybe there's a little meaning for him in this fight. But otherwise, as I said going in, nobody on this card is 3 fights from a title shot. And when you're at that point, it's just, you can't construct many narratives. Yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about the main event now that we've got ourselves all geared up and excited for it. My question to kick off this discussion is, what the fuck is wrong with Derek Brunson? Why can't he not be Derek Brunson? I don't know. What's going on with him? What was your guys' take on his performance?
Whatever Ben Askren has, but without Ben Askren's management.
Knockout Ned on Twitter was saying that he has Patrick Cummins syndrome, in that every shot that hits him lands as clean and as damaging as it possibly could. That he's just getting devastated by every shot that connects. I don't know. There's something janky about Derek Brunson. He's got this weird sort of tenseness to him. It's he gets going and he just can't make any decisions after that. So it's either you get Derek Brunson completely flat, or you get a Derek Brunson who's flat until he loses his mind trying to knock you out. There's just two Derek Brunsons. That's kind of my takeaway from this going forward with Derek Brunson. What do you think, Pat?
I think Brunson kind of is who he is. And the guy who he is, like, there should be technical improvements that he can make, right? Like, there are some fairly clear technical flaws in things that he does. This should be fixable.
Keeping your chin down.
Keeping his chin down, overextending when he throws a left hand. Those are fixable things. There are things that he does in the clinch where his positioning isn't perfect that gives his opponents opportunities to escape, makes him vulnerable to knees to the body, things like that. They're like objective things that he could work on to be better as a fighter. But you can't fix, I think, the kind of wild vacillation between unchecked aggression and being incredibly tentative, right? Like, there's the inability to figure out when is the right time to do this versus when is the not right time to do this. When is the wrong time to sit back versus when is the right time to sit back. Like, it's a kind of a problem with reading the flow of the fight and reading the opponent and figuring out, why am I doing the things that I'm doing at this given point in time? That is not fixable. That's kind of my read on Derek.
It's like, no matter the circumstances of the fight he's having, every decision made is a panicked one. It's like, I don't know if this is right or not. It's like he knows that he's maybe not making the right decision, but he can't tell how to make the right one or how to assess that the decisions he's making. So he's just like, just running in. I mean, it was like he gave Jacare the blueprint to beating him in this fight. He would rush forward and he could land little short shots, but then he wasn't landing too easily, and so he started charging forward with these long combinations, his defensive position just getting worse and worse with each and every punch he throws, until he's so out of position that Jacare can just crack him on the chin with a right-handed counter. And that happened again. Brunson got hurt and then finished with a head kick. It was shocking to me how similar this was to Brunson's loss to Robert Whittaker. It was almost the exact same fight, just with a slightly slower start. Go on, Zane, sorry.
I think that Brunson's kind of proof positive that there are just, like, there are different kinds of coordination and different ways to be coordinated. Like, you can spend your whole career cheerleading and wrestling and have
Don't smile when you say cheerleading, Zane. I heard that. He's over here mocking Derek Brunson's athletic background.
I want to make some terrible joke about how he's got his tumbles down for MMA, but
tumbles, not rumbles.
But the point being, like, it's one thing to spend your whole life doing activities and memorizing the movements to do them, and like that making you pretty decent at those things and like okay at them or good at them even, and then to say, okay, well, now I'm going to pick up a whole new skill, and suddenly having to go back to your baseline level of coordination that makes that skill happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to bet that Derek Brunson looks fairly coordinated in the gym. It really looks like a failure of composure.
You think hitting pads, he looks coordinated?
Well, no, he didn't look great, I guess, now that I think of it.
I mean, there's just kind of... it's a thing that happens, and you get people like, it's the same thing that happens when you get, strikers who have spent their whole lives kickboxing, and they're like, I've been doing some wrestling, I've been grappling, I know what I'm doing, and like I've spent the last 5 years in the MMA room wrestling, and then they get out there and like they get hit by one takedown, and suddenly you're like, have you? Have you ever actually spent any time on this?
Yeah, I
think there's some of that. But it's also like, it is the sense of, maybe and this may be an MMA particular problem. I don't know. I need to watch more boxing and kickboxing to be able to expound on this. So maybe you guys can. But Derek Brunson's stand-up reminds me a little bit of Cole Miller's, in that he's a fighter that is neither comfortable countering nor leading. And so the only places that his striking is effective is when he can just when he can somehow engage a brawl where he can just use his power and land shots. He might get lucky countering, he might get lucky leading, but he doesn't look like a technically comfortable fighter doing either. So his only options are these this ugly striking intersection where he's putting himself in danger while trying to create offense, and that's all he has to go to.
Connor, this is something we talked about a few weeks ago with the difference between Daniel Cormier's pressure and Stipe Miocic's pressure, where we talked about Stipe always having to think about pressuring, that it was that he could do it and do it really well, really effectively, but he always kind of had to think about it a little bit. Derek Brunson has to think about everything that he does on the feet.
Yeah,
he has to think about, am I going to sit back and try and let him come to me and try and pick him off a shot at a time? Am I going to pressure? Okay, well, I really, 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 really need to pressure. There's no kind of middle ground where he's just reading and reacting and feeling comfortable out there. He never looks comfortable with anything that he's doing. Unless he's in the clinch, he looks comfortable in the clinch.
Yeah, and insanely, he hasn't looked comfortable striking since he fought Yoel Romero. He looked more comfortable in that fight than he has in many of the more recent ones. If a lot of this is a mental issue, honestly, Pat, I think you hit the nail on the head when you pointed out over aggressive and tentative, because it is Derek Brunson just has to think about every single thing he's doing. He's flinching his way into exchanges even when he's counterpunching in the pocket. He's not reading what's happening, react, come back, or throw at this time because this. It's here's the 4 punches I'm going to throw. They're going to throw at the same time as me. I'm going to hit way harder than them and hope it works out. I know I already name checked her once, but imagine if Jessica I was much bigger and hit really fucking hard. That's kind of what Derek Brunson looks like. It's just he can't make rational choices once he gets going. I don't know.
That may be a good way to put it too, because I do think of I as somebody who's a lot more coordinated than Derek Brunson, standing at least. But she has the same problems where you look, and because I was a fighter where you watch her in 20 seconds, you're oh no, she looks sharp. Then you watch her over 2 minutes, and you're what is this?
Oh, she's awful. Yeah, it completely changes because it's in the context. I think Derek Brunson might be comfortable using his skills, even if they don't look super pretty. I imagine in sparring in the gym, he probably looks much better than he does in the cage. But it's when things are on the line, he falls apart.
Yeah, it just seems fairly clear. He's a fringe top 10 dude, and there are always going to be some substantial flaws that he has, that are going to prevent him from rising much higher than that. He may eventually surprise in the right matchup, but he kind of is who he is. It's not like he's a prospect anymore either. He's been fighting for I think 10 years.
He's 34 and he's 7 years into his career. So he's in technically he should be still in the prime of his career.
No,
but
he's been fighting longer than that because he lost to Jacare in 2011.
Yeah, but that was a year after his pro debut.
Really?
Yep.
He just had a shitload of fights at the start of his career.
Yep.
I mean, by
That's
MMA
wild.
standards.
That's crazy. Okay, well, what do you know?
But
okay.
I mean, partially he left Jackson Wink a while ago, which I know we don't trumpet Jackson Wink as necessarily the bastion of all things technical striking, but I think part of why his technique, maybe why it looked like he was kind of putting some things together and then all that went away, may just in part be too that a consistent lack of coaching, the OSP problem.
Without the particulars, I feel comfortable. I still feel comfortable giving some credit for that to Greg Jackson, because if our read is correct and it's Derek Brunson having these catastrophic mental meltdowns in his fights and not being able to keep his cool and not being able to make decisions under duress, then that's the kind of stuff Greg Jackson's always been really good at helping his fighters with. Keeping them calm, helping them find their waterfalls, and so on and so forth. So, I think Derek Brunson needs to find his waterfall, or this really is the limit of what he can do as a fighter. A couple quick thoughts on Jacare before we move on to the co-main.
Loved what Jacare was doing. Everything he did was, I thought, in this fight was correct.
Looked solid.
He did not try to go wild and pressure Brunson, which I thought he might do. I thought he might be in one of those phases where he thought, I need to go out there and prove to myself that I can still do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see that with fighters sometimes where after a loss like the one that he had against Robert Whittaker, like it's not like he went out and totally reevaluated what made him who he is as a fighter. And I think that is going to be the key to him staying successful, even as he's now 38. He's been fighting for 14, 15 years. He's been around for a long time, but still looks like he can do it. And I think there's a lot to be said for knowing who you are, and Jacare knows who he is. Because he's so physically gifted, because he's so athletic, that has given him kind of a margin for error as he ages, where he can throw less than he used to. He doesn't need to make himself as vulnerable. He can pick and choose his shots and really watch and read his opponent while putting this kind of subtle pressure on them. So the head kick finish was because he'd thrown like 5 or 6 body kicks first. Like Brunson was not ready for it when he finally went high with the shot. He let Brunson charge in a couple of times before he started throwing counters. Mm-hmm. Then at the end, he started landing the counters, but he mixed up the location too. He threw a beautiful right-hand counter to the body just before the last kind of right-hand counter to the head that stung Brunson a little bit, and before Jacare threw the head kick. I thought it was just beautiful. The takedown, he didn't panic when he didn't get that one takedown, right? He got in there, he shot the shot, it was a good shot, didn't get it. He didn't look exhausted from that. He didn't try to force it. He didn't panic. It was just like a really well put together veteran performance.
Yeah, it was really like watching experience versus no experience. It was like watching somebody who has reaped all the benefits of being an experienced fighter against somebody who seems to have reaped very few of them. Calm, good decision making. How about the way that Jacare just walked towards Brunson like fucking Jason after knocking him down with that head kick? That was scary. I mean, I'm scared of Jacare Souza again. I kind of forgot how scared I used to be of him, but I am back to being afraid of him. The way he just calmly stalked his prey and knocked him. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't like desperate for the finish. Even in the moment of having just about killed a man, he just sort of moseyed on over and finished the job.
I want to quote what Chad Dundas tweeted after that, because it's one of my favorite things. He says, after Jacare stuns Brunson with the kick, he calmly strolls over to finish the job like a guy who just raked his yard, but spotted one last leaf blowing around over there.
Yeah, that was exactly it. He went over, he bent over, picked it up, crushed it between his fingers, and went back inside.
Yep.
Damn.
Yep. That was just, whew. Yeah, no, it was nice. It was so calmly vicious. Yeah. Like he knew the fight was over. He knew he didn't need to blow out any energy. He knew Brunson was done. And like the look on Brunson's face and the look on Brunson's body language told him he was done. Mm-hmm. That's some veteran shit right there.
Yeah.
I'll also say I'm a little excited too for the idea that it could mean, we get a couple more great years out of Jacare, that maybe also too, like changing camps helped him. I know ATT Orlando isn't exactly some like hotbed of great talent, but it might have just been like making a move, doing something different, because like he looked super relaxed on his way in. Mm-hmm. Looked really relaxed all fight, did great. Maybe it's one of those things where you get tracked in so far into a camp for so long, and you make a change and everything just feels fresh and new, and it'd be nice if that carries him for a couple more years and a few more big fights.
Yeah, I would like to see that. Speaking of, I don't think we'll really have a ton of time to talk about it, so I'll just shout it out here. But it's also good to know the same thing about Bobby Green from the Fox Sports 1 prelims, that matched right, Bobby Green still has fun veteran performances left in him, and that the Lando Venata fight was not his last hurrah. So let's move on to the co-main event here. Featherweights Andre Fili and Dennis Bermudez. Zane, I don't think I had a ton to say about this in Heavy Hands last week, Pat, but I definitely recall saying... and I'm going to paraphrase, but this is close to an exact quote. Just looking at Andre Fili, I'm pretty sure he cannot stop a Dennis Bermudez shot. And instead, Andre Fili capably out-wrestled Dennis Bermudez throughout much of the fight. He was basically the only one hitting takedowns. He had no trouble stopping the shot to Dennis Bermudez at all. Andre Fili's wrestling looking better than it ever has, I think.
I would feel really happy with my predicting a Fili win, and why, because it was pretty much exactly why I predicted a Fili win, except that he didn't win. And I would be really happy with it, because like the thing that we're seeing out of Bermudez as time goes on, and as he's been a top contender now for a long time, is that I think pretty much everybody has figured out how Dennis Bermudez fights.
Mm-hmm.
And they know how to shut down even the best parts of his game. They know how to shut down his wrestling. They know how to counter him. They know when he's coming in, what he's throwing when he's coming in, how to work it all. And Fili looked like he had an absolute bead on what Bermudez was doing, except for calf kicks and low kicks and kicks in general, which just ate Fili alive and should have lost him the fight, but somehow didn't. Because, I mean, the way that Fili out-wrestled Dennis Bermudez was just because Bermudez's timing is so predictable that he would rush in and Fili would just hit him with a double leg that there was no way for Bermudez to be in position to stop.
Yeah. I mean, this fight really gave me the impression that Andre Fili is very quietly and in small steps, but in significant ways, getting better with each fight, that his skills are improving. But it also gave me the impression that there is like a hard athletic ceiling on him.
Yeah.
That Dennis Bermudez looked a little shop worn. He looked a little rusty. He was still, in the end, too athletic for Andre Fili to keep up with. It's just like, I'm thinking of Phil McKenzie wrote a piece last week where he talked about Rory McDonald and like the various ways in which we understand athleticism. I'm not sure that I think it's fair to call like durability a kind of athleticism, but physically, it's like Fili cannot take the kind of damage that Dennis Bermudez can take. Bermudez is not a super, he's kind of chinny. He's not a super durable fighter in that sense, but it's like Fili's skin just tears up and he just feels the pain of what Bermudez is doing to him more than Bermudez does in response. He just broke down more quickly over the course of the fight. And then in the end, like Bermudez's always there athletic ability was just enough to overpower Fili and get the win, I think. Pat?
Except on the judges.
Yeah, well, except for the judges not paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton to add to that. I mean, I think like as a fight, Bermudez did what he was supposed to do. He did what was going to give him the best shot of winning the fight, which is to fight like a short, tall guy. That he got in, he went after Fili and took him apart at ranges where Fili should have had an advantage, or at least he traded favorably in those phases. What's kind of interesting to me is over the years, the deterioration of Dennis Bermudez's wrestling. Like, I think if Bermudez was as proficient a wrestler as he was in 2013 or 2014 when he was on that really, really excellent run, like there was a long time where Bermudez, despite having lots of guys shoot takedowns on him, had never been taken down in a UFC fight. And now all of a sudden, Bermudez is giving up lots of takedowns. He gave up takedowns in this fight. He gave up takedowns. Let me go back and check this just so I can be sure. He gave up 3 takedowns to Darren Elkins. He gave up 4 to Andre Fili. He gave up a takedown to Tatsuya Kawajiri when they fought. And before that, he had given up 1 takedown. He gave up a takedown to Brandao, and then I guess he gave up a very temporary one to Matt Grice. And then he went through this period of years and years and years where he was impossible to take down, where he was just rock solid. And he was kind of a wrestle boxer, a high volume, high output wrestle boxer. And now it turns out he's vulnerable in all sorts of ways. I don't know if that's just aging or if he emphasizes it less than he used to, but like I almost think he's kind of fallen in love with being a mid-range striker instead of being a dude who's just going to power you off your feet, take you down, and beat you up from the top, which I think is really what is probably what he's best at when it comes to the context of this division, which is not full of a ton of really gifted defensive wrestlers.
Yeah, that could be. He's definitely like, he's always had this sort of predictability to the way he comes forward. I mean, the takedowns Fili was hitting on him were very reminiscent of the takedowns Gustafsson hit on Daniel Cormier, like just this long, tall striker using sort of striker's timing to catch somebody as they're stepping in and take them off balance. But Bermudez used to, like, well-roundedness used to sort of be his go-to. That was one of his keys to victory in a lot of fights, is that he could do everything really, really well. And that was what I expected to give him the edge over Fili. But it really did not look like he could do everything as comfortably as he used to.
It's just weird. Like, he went 1 for 11 on takedowns against Fili. And in fairness, Fili is a much better defensive wrestler than he used to be. But he's not it should not be that hard to take Fili down. You should not go 1 for 11 on takedowns against Andre Fili if you're the kind of wrestler that Bermudez used to be. And I don't know what the reason is for that. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but like it really feels like he kind of used to be better at it than he is now.
I honestly, I mean, I like the narrative that it's just honestly enough time that people have seen all the facets of his game, and they just are like, I mean, you know, somebody from Fili's camp just fought Darren Elkins, like, just, you know, 6 months ago.
Yeah. No, that's true. You're right.
And if you've seen, like, it's one of those things that you see, I think happens a lot, especially with, usually it happens with guys who aren't very athletic but have a really weird skill set, where they come in and they win a bunch of fights in the UFC and they like go on this crazy run where everybody's like, oh my God, what, you know, is this guy really way better than we thought? And then everybody learns exactly what those like 4 weird tricks they know are and just beats the piss out of them for every fight from that point forward. And I kind of wonder if Bermudez is getting a much like less harsh version of that, and it lasted a lot longer because he was a better athlete and had a more well-rounded game, but he always does everything in such predictable patterns where everybody's finally just like, okay, no, I know how every Dennis Bermudez attack and fight is going to look, and I just have to prepare for that.
Yeah, but that quintuple jab, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to like that with no head movement at all, just sort of mechanically pumping it out, and Andre Fili still not being quite able to figure out how to counter it consistently.
Well, the thing is, like, the thing that pisses me off is it really did look like Fili had like the basic idea of how to stop what Bermudez was doing.
He did it for a round.
Then he could not find the strikes at all, and instead defaulted to counter takedowns where he did nothing with them. Yep.
All right, well, we'll run through the rest of these quickly. Gregor Gillespie, not a ton to say about it because it was not particularly competitive. Mostly just praise for the ground game of Gregor Gillespie. There was one moment in this fight where he passed to mount, didn't feel he had it, slid off with like perfect use of his legs, the way that he would angle his foot across the belly just to keep Rinaldi's hips flattened. Slid off into side control and then slid right back into mount. Everything was so effortless and nice, and it was all aggressive. If we're talking about like the difference between Derek Brunson having no flow as an aggressive fighter, when Gregor Gillespie gets going, when he gets into his rhythm, he too is a snowball kind of fighter. And that definitely looked like the case in this matchup to me. He just, once he had an opening in on Rinaldi, it was just nonstop, relentless pressure, standing and on the ground. What did you guys think, real quick?
Oh, Dude's legit.
Yeah, dude's legit. That's our quick analysis.
Well, no, I think Gillespie was a guy who was hyped as a big time prospect when he was coming up because of his wrestling pedigree. I was a little not sold on him because he didn't start fighting until he was 28. He's not a young guy now, but he has answered basically every question that I could hope to ask him at this point. His wrestling has translated extremely well. He's got a really nicely adapted top control game and scrambling game that melds together jiu-jitsu and his wrestling base really nicely. He's very dangerous from the top right, takes the back well. He knows how to control on top, but also float on top if he wants to kind of wear you out over time. He knows how to keep his weight down so that he can throw really damaging strikes from top position while at the same time looking for submissions. He knows how his striking game plays into his wrestling game. So he's aggressive and pressures, works at a good pace, puts nice combinations together, looks technically sound. I think he is a really, really, really good prospect, especially in a lightweight division that doesn't have a ton of kind of wrestling first fighters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my only concern really is just his size. That's my only feeling, is that he looks like a featherweight in the lightweight division, and being a high pressure wrestler usually works best when you're the bigger man against opposition. And I could easily see it getting to the point, like if he goes up the chain and fights somebody like Kevin Lee, suddenly the wrestling edge is not there.
Yeah. Like, I think Gillespie might be shockingly competitive with people who are taller than them but prefer to strike. Like, having that little tiny compact build can be pretty helpful for getting in on shots, but just sheer strength against someone like Kevin Lee, it is hard to imagine Gillespie having the horsepower to compete.
There's a reason that you usually see wrestlers drop down as low as they can and be huge in divisions rather than being the like scrappy undersized guy who, rather than being Robert Whittaker. There's a reason that Derek, that like your bigger guys who look like they could be a division up drop down as wrestlers. And it's just because the strength advantage helps a lot when you're depending on being able to pull somebody to the mat and keep them there.
Mm-hmm.
And like Gillespie had on his way up, he had a notably hard fight with Sidney Outlaw. It was a split decision that was almost entirely hard just because he had to work so hard to control Outlaw, a bigger athlete on the ground. But in the he hasn't had to face that adversity in the UFC so far, and the fact that he's just utterly tireless is going to save him a lot. Like his gas tank is impossibly good.
Yeah.
So
he does at least have that. Like part of what made Frankie Edgar such a good small wrestler was the endless gas tank. So that is to his advantage. Drew Dober and Frank Camacho went to war. Pat, I told you it would be fun, man.
It was fun. It was a great fight.
It was a lot of fun, right? Frank Camacho is like one of the. He reminds me, like, I've been watching, Justin Golightly, Secret Moves, and his involvement in various tournaments with the new UFC video game. And Frank Camacho looks like the fighters in that game, where like he loads up on 3 massive shots and then his stamina bar is empty, and he has to wait like 3 seconds for it to reconstitute before he can do anything, and that includes avoiding shots coming back at him. After about the first round, Frank Camacho was just dead tired, but
I'm not even sure why he was dead tired.
I know, he always gets that way. Like I said, he's got some.
He clearly did really well in the first round and had it totally in hand.
Well, that's the problem. He did too well. I really thought Drew Dober, and Pat, so did you. We both thought Drew Dober would hit a lot more takedowns on Frank Camacho. He had an extremely hard time with Frank in the clinch.
I mean, I don't want to say that I told you so, but Drew Dober is still not a very good wrestler. He has gotten a little better at it, but out-wrestling Scott Holtzman, his biggest wrestling claim to fame, is just not like the highlight of being a great wrestler.
Yeah, I just kind of thought that Frank going back up to welterweight, like I just kind of thought he moved down for a reason, that he felt he was not strong enough. But Dober's not a particular
undersized welterweight, but apparently his diet is not in order to be a lightweight.
Yeah,
but that's what it seems like.
Dober kind of is too. So like, even though I did think Dober won this, I thought he got the last 2 rounds. I do think it's kind of crazy. So many people gave Frank Camacho the 3rd round in which he was just being lit up by everything Dober threw. I know he was looking real mean.
More on CompuBox on stats. Yeah,
that seems impossible.
Says he landed more.
Man, he definitely walked through everything and landed more. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. Either way, like, it does kind of put a cap on Dober. Like, I've been watching him, and like, he's developing. I'm not sold that he can actually become that much better than he is. And like, if you can't out-muscle Frank Camacho, how much success are you going to have trying to be like the well-rounded, I do everything pretty well guy? You know?
Wait, let me see if I lied to you. I may have lied to you. No, I didn't. No, Camacho,
you would never.
52 significant strikes to 48, 67 overall to 53 in round 3.
Yeah.
Dober had a big edge overall because round 2 was so lopsided.
Mm-hmm.
I love Camacho because it's like I'm a big enough fan of the baseline version of Robbie Lawler's game that playing like a beta version of it is just still a thrill to me. Including the whole, like, I just got to take a bunch of time off now and like get hit for a while in order to get back in this fight.
That's why I also compared him to Mark Hunt, who seems perfectly at home when he is just exhausted, winging ball. Yeah. Like, somehow he still remains almost as competitive, exhausted as he is completely fresh. All right, last words on Mirsad Bektic. Solar plexus shot to put down Godofredo Pepe, an overhand right to the belly, something you do not often see. But Mirsad Bektic, once again, gets a quick finish, and once again makes it a little difficult to evaluate where he might be as a developing prospect. Pat, your thoughts?
I think the comparisons here are meaningful, right? Because what did Godofredo Pepe do over the course of 3 rounds with Shane Burgos in his last fight?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Burgos hit him a lot. Burgos hit him pretty hard, didn't put him down. But that was a competitive fight, even though Burgos pretty clearly won every round there. The fact that Bektic came out and put him away in the first round, I think tells you something meaningful about what kind of potential Bektic still has.
Oh, no doubt about that. It's just that I want to see more of Bektic being tested to like know what his limits are, you know?
Oh, no question. Yeah, I too would like to see that. But that's kind of the problem with a guy as talented as Bektic is that unless you put him in there with like the most durable possible fighters who are also kind of bad stylistic matchups for him, Bektic is just going to run through dudes.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to tell. I mean, I think the only people who know how good Bektic actually is are like Faraz Sahabi, who's now coaching him, and his old coaches at ATT, and probably his sparring partners. Like, we have no idea how deep some of his skill sets go if not for that. The real question here, and I think this is where Zahabi is probably the right coach for him at this point, is what he really needs to work on is kind of feeling the flow of the fight, decision making, rounding things out, and game planning for specific opponents. Zahabi should be pretty good for him with that because Bektic has all the baseline skills that he needs at this point. He could stand to throw some more round kicks, though that was something nice that we saw from him to give him more options in mid-range. But, you know, he's on track. I don't know if he's a future champion. I think Bektic may be a little more matchup dependent than I thought before he lost to Elkins. I think he's going to have trouble with guys who can kind of stick and move at long distance. But he's still an elite prospect. He's still young. He's 24. He's like 6 years into his career. The dude is going to be real, real good. It's just hopefully he can stay healthy, get him in there with somebody like Feely or maybe Miles Jury in the next few months, and we'll see where he goes. What do you guys think?
I like. I'll go with Sharapov.
Yes,
I don't care.
Zane insanely wants him to fight Zabit so we can knock off two prospects with one fight. It would be a fun ass matchup.
I mean, I'm just in favor of like if you've got a fight that cool to make it when you can. And I know like it should be saved, but it just sounds like such a cool fight right now.
Well, all I know is that Andre Feely upset the old ones, the ancient gods, by breaking the pattern and getting 2 wins in a row.
Sure, yeah.
And I need Mirsad Bektic to correct that. So I agree.
The Wood scenario where like Andre Feely did not end up being the sacrificed teen on the altar underground, and now.
Yeah, and now it's going to become a Final Destination type scenario where Mirsad Bektic comes around to finish the job. I like that matchup. Zane, you also mentioned Renato Moicano, or was that for Andre Feely?
But
I think similarly, down the road, Moicano would be a good test. He is that kind of outfighter that Pat sort of supposed would give Bektic some problems. So I would like to see him fight somebody of that type. Although I do think Feely is probably a little. I don't know. Moicano's less proven than Feely, but I do feel that Moicano is more like stick to his fundamentals, don't crack under pressure, and that Feely might be a little more exploitable. But Feely might also be a much better defensive wrestler. So
the only thing I will say is, for God's sake, do not have him fight Doo-Ho Choi.
Oh no,
not right now.
Spare them both. Spare them both the possible outcomes of that.
Doo-Ho would take way too much damage at this point. Like, I just want him to go to the military right now and just like take 2 years to save your damn head.
Yeah. Well, that's the UFC's method now, is like just action fight, even when your action fighters are prospects that could turn into something. Like Lando Venata gets nothing but wars, Mike Perry gets nothing but wars, and now Doo-Ho Choi is going to get nothing but wars.
Like, Lando Venata is a dude where I do wonder if he will ever like even be a top-ranked fighter for the UFC, just because they're just going to put him through a meat grinder of like wins and losses until he's done. Yeah.
Same shit with Mike Perry. I mean, Mike Perry, their step back from Mike Perry is Max Griffin, who is like a superb athlete who hits really hard. Like, if he can't put Max away, that's going to be another war. I don't understand that. But anyway, we'll let you guys plug some things before we wrap up here. Zane, do you have anything coming out this week that the listeners should keep their eyes out for?
Well, if you're listening, I mean, we'll be doing the MMA Vivisection with you, so you'll be there.
Yeah,
and,
I will.
You have to plug it too at that point. And I'll be doing a 6-round post-fight show afterward. I don't know if I'll be doing another Vivisection. I always just kind of play those by ear on the week. If there's another Bellator Invicta sometimes KSW or whatever card going on. There might not be anything this week else to focus on, but yeah, I mean, that's the week I've got ahead of me.
Pat, anything coming out this week?
I actually don't think I have any single thing coming out this week. This is a research week for the next couple of episodes of Tides of History. I will have a new episode on the fall of the Roman Empire coming out a week from Thursday, but that's it. I'm finishing up my article on millennials and migration and education right now.
Finishing it up.
Yep, I'm doing one more interview. I'm about a third of the way done writing it. I should have it done by Friday, so hopefully we should see it up. Yeah, and I mean, I guess in the next few weeks.
Awesome. As for me, last week I was supposed to publish an article about Calvin Kattar versus Shane Burgos. It's going to come out this week, hopefully before this episode airs. But it turned into a really...
So you.
I know.
As your editor, let me tell you how you that is.
It did become quite an in-depth breakdown of what I found to be a really fascinating kickboxing match between two great young MMA prospects. So keep your eyes out for that one. And if I have time, I'm going to try and write something about Alexander Usyk versus Myris Briedis, because though we did not talk about it on the show, we're mostly MMA focused these days on Heavy Hands. That was the best fight of the weekend, without question. Two of the best super middleweight boxers in the world met and just had, not super middleweight, cruiserweight boxers in the world met and put on a phenomenal fight. So I'm going to hopefully have a chance to write something about that. Otherwise, that just about does it for us here on this episode of Heavy Hands. A big thanks to Zane for joining us. Find us all on social media. You can find Zane at the Zane Simon. Pat is, of course, at Patrick_Wyman. And I am at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. Check us out on our various other social media platforms. Check out the stuff we told you to check out before. And until next time, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.